The light in Nicole Eggert's bathroom was too bright, too sterile, like the fluorescent hum of a hospital corridor. She stared at the reflection in the mirror, one hand braced against the sink, the other gently grazing the outline of her chest beneath her loose shirt. The caption she would later write for Instagram, half humor, half defiance, was already forming in the back of her mind. Had a mastectomy with reconstruction on Thursday. How was your weekend? But now, here alone, there was nothing funny about it. She remembered the first sign, an ache that wouldn't leave her body, a kind of dull gnawing that settled in her breast. At first, she chalked it up to stress, hormones, age. 53, she had whispered to herself in the shower one morning, water sliding down her back, is not supposed to feel like a countdown clock. It was her daughter Dylan, who first caught the shift in her mood. Kids have a way of detecting the tremors adults try to hide. "Mom, why are you holding your side like that?" she had asked one night, her young face crumpling in worry. Nicole had brushed it off with a smile, but later that night, lying in the dark, she felt the weight of her daughter's gaze in her chest. It was enough to make her schedule the appointment she'd been avoiding. And so began the cascade. Mammogram, biopsy, words that landed like a punch to the gut. Stage 2 cribriform carcinoma. The doctor's mouth kept moving, syllables tumbling like stones into a river. But her mind had already split in two. One half, clinical, detached. Okay, treatment plan, options, prognosis. The other half. How do I tell my daughter? How do I carry this weight without letting it crush her childhood? There's a practical truth in this moment, one that often gets missed in the noise of statistics and survival rates. When cancer arrives, it never arrives alone. It brings with it fear, shame, questions, and the silent burden of the people you love. Nicole learned this the hard way. She decided early on she would not hide it from Dylan. Too many families, she knew, fall into silence when illness comes knocking, hoping to protect their children by pretending nothing is wrong. But silence, she believed, could be its own form of cruelty. So one evening, sitting at the kitchen table, she took her daughter's small hands in hers and said softly, "Mommy's body has something inside it that doesn't belong. It's called cancer. And we're going to fight it. Together." Her daughter nodded wide-eyed and then whispered, "Do I get to help?" Nicole laughed, though her throat ached. "Yes," she said, "you help just by being you." That night, Nicole wrote down the first of many lessons in the notebook she had begun to keep. Lesson 1. Honesty with your children may feel heavy, but it builds resilience in them. Shielding them from reality only teaches fear of the unknown. The weeks that followed were a blur of hospital corridors, consultation rooms, and the peculiar mechanical rhythm of medical routines. She shaved her head before the chemo could take it from her, turning what might have been devastation into a ritual of control. Dylan held the clippers, hands trembling but determined, and when it was done, she pressed her face into her mother's neck and whispered, "You're still beautiful." There are moments in illness that feel like cinematic freeze frames, tiny acts of love that reframe the terror. Nicole would later tell friends that losing her hair was less about vanity than about identity. "You don't realize how much of yourself you've stored in your reflection," she said. "But when it's gone, what's left is truer. Raw. You." Still, the body rebels in ways no pep talk can smooth over. The sickness after chemotherapy was bone deep. Nights of vomiting, mornings of dizziness, afternoons where the world narrowed to the steady beep of the infusion pump. She would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, and wonder how many pieces of herself she could lose before she stopped being Nicole altogether. And yet, she documented it. Sometimes in public posts, other times in private journal entries. She wanted her struggle to mean something more than pain. Awareness. Yes. Education. Yes. But also solidarity. A way of whispering into the void. You're not alone if this is happening to you too. Practical lesson number 2 emerged here, scrawled in uneven handwriting between doctor's notes. Lesson 2. Document the journey. Illness thrives in secrecy, but stories shared become lanterns for others walking the same dark path. The decision to undergo mastectomy was not made lightly. It was, in her own words, like signing a contract with loss. To remove a part of the body that had defined her womanhood, on the beaches of Baywatch, in the glances of strangers, in the mirror each morning, was both terrifying and strangely liberating. When she told her surgeon she wanted reconstruction, he nodded gently, explaining the steps, the risks, the recovery. Nicole's mind drifted back to the years when the industry she worked in measured women in curves and silhouettes. Baywatch body, they used to call it, as if she were a mannequin rather than a woman with a mind, a heart and a breaking point. The irony wasn't lost on her. What once made her famous had become the site of her fiercest battle. On the night before the surgery, she sat by the window, city lights flickering like a constellation, and thought about her body's story. Scars would come, yes. But scars, she realized, were not the end of beauty. They were the evidence of survival. Lesson 3. Redefine beauty. Illness will take what it takes. But if you tether your worth to what you look like, you'll lose twice. True beauty is endurance, grace under fire, the courage to stay soft in a world that can be so sharp. The morning of the mastectomy, as nurses wheeled her into the cold, sterile theater of the operating room, she whispered a prayer under her breath. She wasn't praying to be spared from scars or even from pain. She was praying that her story would matter. That someone somewhere would choose early screening because of her. That some daughter wouldn't have to sit in a waiting room, wringing her hands, because her mother had caught it in time. Hours later, she woke to a dull ache that radiated through her torso. The room was blurred at the edges, her mouth dry, her body both alien and familiar. She reached instinctively for the bandages across her chest and felt the absence. The absence of what once was, the presence of what now remained. The surgeon's voice was steady. The procedure went well. We'll monitor you closely. Healing takes time. Healing. Such a simple word, yet so layered. Healing wasn't just about stitches closing and skin knitting back together. It was about her daughter's laughter when she came home. About the way her friends rallied with meals, text messages, prayers. About strangers online leaving comments like, "You gave me the courage to book my own mammogram." And it was about Nicole herself, choosing, each morning, to look in the mirror not with grief but with a kind of fierce gratitude. The days blurred again into recovery. Some were filled with hope, others with fatigue so crushing she could barely lift her head. But still she wrote, still she shared, still she reminded herself that her story was bigger than her fear. Because here is another truth, one carved into the marrow of her experience. Cancer is not only a disease of the body. It is a thief of time, of certainty, of identity. To fight it requires not just medicine but meaning. And Nicole had found her meaning. Not in being a former Baywatch star, not in the nostalgia of a past life, but in being a present, vulnerable, resilient woman who dared to speak out loud what others whispered in the dark. That weekend, when she posted the photo that would spark headlines, "Had a mastectomy with reconstruction on Thursday. How was your weekend?" She did it not to shock, but to disarm. To remind people that behind celebrity is humanity, behind scars is strength, behind diagnosis is choice. The comments poured in, thousands of them. Messages of love, of solidarity, of women scheduling mammograms because of her honesty. And in the quiet after, when her phone was finally set down and the house had gone still, Nicole lay back against her pillow and whispered to herself, "This is why. This is why I keep telling the story." But even as she found courage, a question lingered like a shadow in the corner of the room. A question no doctor could answer, no friend could erase. What if this isn't the end of the battle? What if cancer is still waiting inside me, silent, unseen? And with that thought came another sharper one. What will I do if it comes back? If you knew that scars and uncertainty would be the price of survival, would you still choose the fight, or would you choose a different path? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to walk with us through the rest of Nicole's journey, through the shadows and the light, make sure you hit the subscribe button now. The first week after surgery was the longest week of Nicole Eggert's life. Pain wasn't the sharp, screaming thing she had braced for. It was slower, heavier, like an anchor pressing into her chest every time she shifted in bed. The bandages itched, her skin felt foreign, her body a patchwork quilt she didn't yet recognize as her own. But the hardest part wasn't physical. It was the silence in her house when night fell. Dylan would curl up beside her, hair splayed like a halo across the pillow, whispering stories about school, friends, dreams. But when her daughter's breath deepened into sleep, Nicole was left staring into the dark, wondering if she had truly made the right choice. One night she whispered to herself, "Am I still me?" That question became a drumbeat in her chest. The next morning, a text buzzed on her phone. It was from an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years. "I saw your post. You're brave. I couldn't do it. I'd rather die than live without my body intact." Nicole stared at the words until her vision blurred. Then she deleted the message and set the phone face down. Here's a truth most people don't admit. Recovery is not only about fighting pain, it's about fighting the story society tells us about what makes us worthy. For Nicole, that story was written in red swimsuits and glossy magazine covers. She had been the blonde bombshell, the body on the beach, the girl every camera lingered on. And though decades had passed since Baywatch, the ghost of that image still haunted her. Would people still see her as beautiful? Would they whisper about what was missing? Would she, herself, ever look in the mirror and see more than scars? She didn't know. But she was determined to find out. On the 10th day post-surgery, she asked her nurse to remove the bandages. The nurse hesitated. "Are you sure? Sometimes it helps to wait." "No," Nicole interrupted gently. "If I wait, the fear grows. Let's do it now." The room smelled faintly of antiseptic. The sound of the adhesive peeling back was louder than it should have been. And then the bandages were gone, and she was staring down at a body she both recognized and didn't. Scars traced across her chest, pink and tender. Beneath the swelling, the reconstruction was visible, shaping a new silhouette. It was not what she had once been, but it was hers. Nicole took a slow breath. Tears slid down her cheeks, not of grief, but of something stranger, relief. She whispered almost to herself, "I survived." That night she wrote in her journal, Lesson 4, "Scars do not diminish us, they declare that we were strong enough to endure." Do not fear the mark of survival. Fear silence. Fear not fighting. But the outside world was less forgiving. Paparazzi snapped photos when she left her doctor's office. Headlines sprouted like weeds. Baywatch star battling cancer. Comment sections filled with strangers debating her body as if it were public property. She was so hot back then. Poor thing, she's ruined now. She should have fought harder to keep herself whole. Nicole read some of them at first, but quickly learned the cost. It was a cruel irony. The very body that had been commodified and idolized in her youth was now the subject of pity and judgment. As though a woman's worth could be tallied up in curves and smoothness. As though courage was less visible than cleavage. The sting of it could have broken her. But instead, she chose to answer it differently. In a late-night live stream, wearing no makeup, wrapped in a simple hoodie, she looked into the camera and said, "You know, I used to think my body was the reason people watched me. But this scarred body carried me through chemo. This scarred body walked back into my daughter's room after surgery. This scarred body is alive. If you think it's ruined, maybe it's your definition of beauty that's broken." The video went viral. Comments poured in, not cruel this time, but grateful. Women sent photos of their own scars, their own battles, their own proof of survival. Men wrote about wives, mothers, sisters who had walked through fire. Survivors whispered thank yous across digital spaces. And for the first time since her diagnosis, Nicole felt not only seen but understood. Still, resilience was not a straight line. Some mornings she woke with energy, ready to walk the block, drink her tea, journal. Other mornings she could not move. Depression lingered at the edges of her mind like a storm cloud. One afternoon, staring out at the California sun blazing over the street, she admitted aloud, "I don't know how to be both a fighter and a person who is tired." That's when her therapist offered a phrase she would carry with her. "You don't have to be strong every day to be strong overall." It was a lesson she etched into her journal, circling the words until the ink almost bled through the page. Lesson 5. Resilience is not constant. Some days it looks like walking tall. Other days, it looks like crawling forward. Both are valid. Both are survival. Recovery was not just a medical process. It was rebuilding her relationship with mirrors. It was teaching herself to dress again, learning which fabrics no longer scratched against tender skin, figuring out how to navigate intimacy with her new body. It was also about food. Chemotherapy had drained her appetite, left metallic tastes on her tongue, made the thought of eating heavy. So she began experimenting. Small smoothies in the morning, bone broth at night, slices of watermelon on hot days. She wrote about it online, turning her trial-and-error meals into tiny lessons for other survivors. "Don't starve your healing," she typed one evening. "Even if it's only 3 bites, eat something that loves you back." The advice caught on. Her posts became little lifelines for people scattered across the world who were, like her, navigating the fragile days of treatment and recovery. But privately, Nicole still wrestled with the darker voice inside her head. What if the cancer comes back? What if the mastectomy wasn't enough? What if I'm living on borrowed time and don't even know it? At night, fear returned with a vengeance. Every ache, every cough, every twinge felt like a warning. She learned to journal through it, to pour the dread onto paper before it could suffocate her. Lesson 6. Fear will not vanish. But if you name it, if you write it down, it loses the power to own you. And yet, stigma remained. At a dinner one evening, someone, well-meaning but clumsy, said to her, "I just can't imagine living without breasts. It's what makes you a woman." Nicole paused, sipping her water slowly, then met their eyes. "What makes me a woman is not what I lost," she said softly, "but what I chose to fight for. My daughter still has a mother. That's what matters." The table fell silent. Moments like that hardened her resolve. Hollywood might cling to shallow definitions of beauty, but she was rewriting them in real time. Still, the road ahead was uncertain. Reconstruction was a process, not a finish line. Chemo left her fatigued, dizzy, emotional. Parenting through treatment tested her patience and strength. And even as she appeared online, offering light to strangers, privately she sometimes felt like she was only pretending to be okay. Which led to the hardest question she had yet to face. What if survival is not enough? What if living means learning how to dream again, in a body I don't fully recognize? She wrote it in her journal, left it hanging, unanswered. I'm alive. But am I still whole? If survival meant losing part of yourself, physical or otherwise, would you choose to fight, or would you choose to hold on to what you once were? Comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button now. The morning light streamed across Nicole Eggert's living room, touching the framed photos that lined the mantel. Her daughter's school portraits, a candid shot of herself on the Baywatch set, a Polaroid of her laughing with friends in the 1990s. Each picture felt like a checkpoint, a breadcrumb trail back to the girl she had been, the woman she had become, the mother and fighter she was now. She stretched carefully on the couch, her body still adjusting to its new contours after reconstruction. There was a tug at her chest whenever she lifted her arms, a constant reminder of the surgery. But she had begun to accept this tug not as an enemy but as a quiet companion, proof of survival. The early days of her recovery had been filled with silence, interrupted only by pain medication alarms and the slow shuffle of her footsteps down the hallway. But as weeks turned into months, silence gave way to words. Nicole began journaling again. The act of putting pen to paper was not about nostalgia or vanity, but about control. Writing let her reclaim the narrative. Her first entry was simple. I'm still here. From that day, the entries multiplied. She wrote about her fears, her scars, her daughter's courage, her gratitude for the nurse who checked on her when no one else seemed to. Slowly, she realized that these words were not just for her. They were seeds for others who might someday walk the same terrifying path. Nicole's circle widened. A friend introduced her to a support group for women living with breast cancer, and though she was hesitant at first, she eventually logged into one of their late-night Zoom calls. On her screen, she saw women with shaved heads, women with scarves wrapped like crowns, women with reconstructed bodies who carried their scars like badges. And she saw herself reflected back. I'm Nicole, she said quietly, feeling almost shy. I'm new to this. A woman with silver streaks in her hair leaned forward. You're not new, she said warmly. You're one of us. And you're already further than you think. That night, Nicole stayed on the call until the very end, listening, laughing, and crying. For the first time since her diagnosis, she felt like she wasn't treading water alone. But resilience is not just found in community. It is built in the small, stubborn choices of daily life. Nicole began taking slow walks around her neighborhood. First just a few blocks, then half a mile. She traded her processed comfort foods for simple, nourishing meals. She drank water with the diligence of a soldier. She practiced yoga stretches, shaky at first, then steady. She allowed herself to nap without guilt. Each of these decisions was small, but each stacked on the last, forming a scaffold strong enough to hold her healing body. She began to see her story differently. What had once felt like an ending, her mastectomy, her cancer diagnosis, was instead a beginning. And so Nicole chose to speak. The first time she shared her experience publicly, it was through a raw Instagram post. No makeup, no filters, just her sitting on her porch with her scar partially visible. She wrote about fear, about pain, about her daughters, about the loneliness that cancer can carve out of you. She expected silence. Instead, the post exploded. Thousands of women messaged her. Some were survivors. Some were still in chemo. Some were daughters who had just lost mothers. Some were mothers terrified of leaving daughters behind. You put into words what I've been afraid to say. I don't feel so alone anymore. Thank you for showing your scar. I don't hate mine as much now. Nicole realized that by opening the door to her own suffering, she had given others permission to open theirs. She took that responsibility seriously. Over time, she partnered with breast cancer awareness organizations, lending her voice, her platform, and her story. She appeared on panels, podcasts, and daytime television. Not as the glamorous Baywatch star, but as a survivor, an advocate, a living example of how life doesn't end at diagnosis. At one charity walk in Los Angeles, she stood on the stage before hundreds of people, the pink ribbons fluttering in the breeze. She clutched the microphone, her voice steady. You may know me from a TV show, but that's not why I'm here, she said. I'm here because I had breast cancer. I had a mastectomy. I had nights where I thought I wouldn't see the sunrise. And I'm here to tell you, you are not your diagnosis. You are not your scars. You are more. The crowd erupted. Nicole smiled, but later that night, sitting in her kitchen with tea, she wrote in her journal again. Am I doing enough? Or am I still hiding behind the fragments of who I used to be? The truth is, activism was not just a gift she was giving to others. It was a path to hold herself accountable. Every time she spoke out, she was reminded of her own strength, and her own responsibility to keep fighting, not just for survival, but for life. There were still shadows, of course. Late at night, when the house was quiet, her mind sometimes replayed the what-ifs. What if the cancer returned? What if her daughters had to watch her fade? What if she had chosen not to go to that doctor's appointment months ago? But she didn't let those questions fester. Instead, she used them as fuel. Fuel to schedule her checkups, fuel to encourage other women not to delay their screenings, fuel to keep moving forward. Nicole's resilience was not the absence of fear. It was the decision to keep walking even with fear at her side. As she built this new chapter of her life, she also began offering practical advice to women who reached out. She wasn't a doctor, but she knew what it was to wake up after surgery, to trace a scar in the mirror, to worry about being seen as less feminine. She knew the quiet ache of stigma and the roar of resilience. Document your journey, she would say. Even if it's just for you. It will show you how far you've come. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Sometimes they just don't know how. Your worth is not in your breasts, your hair, or your appearance. It's in your persistence, your love, your will to keep living. These were not platitudes. They were lessons carved out of blood, stitches, and survival. One afternoon, Nicole sat at her desk, flipping through her old Baywatch scripts. She hadn't looked at them in years. The pages were sun-faded, some with her notes scribbled in the margins. She remembered the younger version of herself. Eager, ambitious, living inside a body she thought would never betray her. She smiled softly. That girl was gone. But in her place was a woman far stronger. Her phone buzzed, a message from a young woman who had just been diagnosed with the same rare cancer Nicole had faced. Cribriform carcinoma. I'm terrified, the message read. How did you get through it? Nicole typed slowly, thoughtfully. One day at a time. With tears, with laughter, with mistakes, with grace. You don't get through it by being unafraid. You get through it by walking forward anyway. As she hit send, she felt the weight of her story not as a burden, but as a torch, one she was now passing forward. The future was still uncertain. Cancer had taught her that certainty was a myth. But she had also learned that life is not measured by guarantees, but by what we choose to do with the days we are given. And Nicole Eggert had chosen to live. She closed her journal that night with one final sentence. My scars are not an ending. They are the beginning of my legacy. The page shimmered under the lamplight, as though the words themselves were stitched into the fabric of survival. And somewhere in that quiet house, between the shadows of fear and the glow of resilience, a question began to form. One she wanted to leave with every person who heard her story. If your scars could speak, what would they say about you? If this story moved you, join our community by subscribing. Stories like Nicole's remind us that behind every diagnosis is a human being with strength, scars, and wisdom to share. And now I want to hear from you. What do you believe your scars, visible or invisible, are teaching you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.